how do you currently assess whether a locum tenens role should then transition to a permanent placement? And Phil, I'd love to start with you on this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, from our organization's perspective, we would look at what was the purpose of that initial locum role. We're in a position where we typically have locums here year round because of a rather ongoing shortage of anesthesia providers. But what we'd want to look at is, if it was, say, we brought in a subspecialist and there was continued need for that subspecialty skill set, is that something that then we can transition into a full-time permanent role for our team? That's sort of how we would look at this or approach it on a case-by-case basis.
So it does really also start with a needs assessment of, okay, right, is this person in the right spot to be able to do that job?
Correct.
Absolutely. Garth, would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think, ultimately from a sustainability perspective, in a best case of all worlds, what we'd want to identify maybe a short-term possibility in audition and kind of a try it before you buy it approach to convert a locums to a perm. In terms of, from an ability for a practice manager or an administrator or a department chief to be able to generate revenue quickly, locums is a great answer. But unfortunately, as we all know, they're more expensive than the perm option. I think the main question, is how we utilize and how we deploy those locums and how do we synergize them effectively with our permanent providers who are on staff. So the question is are the locums in general treated or given the same type of caseloads? Are those different? Or from a cultural perspective, how do we approach that? Certainly I think that's a practice by practice scenario, but ultimately, what we do find is about 1%, which is lower than we would expect and want to see, of locums actually do transition into a perm role.
Wow.
So it's an interesting dynamic where that's a provider choice for a litany of reasons, and certainly we'll dive into that as we progress. But interesting dynamics in that regard is what we find today in specific specialties is particular locums wish to remain locums.
Yeah. Lance, we heard about the sustainability piece, and then I love the try before you buy it perspective on this, right? Is what do we need and how does it fit into the organization itself? What's your perspective on this?
Sure. Well, to dovetail on what Phil and Garth have mentioned, it doesn't occur often enough. And I think employers, physician groups, as we look at more flexibility and innovation in the workforce, we can think through some of the challenges and offer some flexibility. Like I'm just thinking, for example, of a new graduate. Many physicians are also married to physicians, and there may be a trailing spouse that's a year or two behind. And if employers were more open to, let's say, not a locums contract necessarily, but more short-term arrangements, because there's a little bit of uncertainty of where the spouse will match or be able to find employment in that market, it would open up, I think, the ability for candidates to establish roots, to connect with the culture of their employers, and then ultimately the hope would be, remain long term.